Humanism is a philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. Humanists strive to lead fulfilling, meaningful, and ethical lives using reason and empathy to guide their decisions and actions. We do this because this is the only life of which we are certain. Humanists affirm the dignity and worth of all people. We do this not only for all that humans have accomplished in the arts and science and humanities, but also simply for the possibility of peace and well-being that occurs when people are respected for their human potential. The Humanists of Greater Portland is a chapter of the American Humanist Association, and the American Humanist Association has developed a list of 10 commitments, and it's just a gentle guide on how to live the behaviors of living a humanist life. Our topic today, advocating for unpopular positions, which I'm really looking forward to for a couple of reasons. Just because I find it a really important topic right now to consider, and also one of our own members is going to be presenting. But this addresses the multiple humanist commitments that include critical thinking, ethics, humility, and responsibility. Our reader today is Ann Henderson.
And this is from Scientific American. It's called Subjectivity. Rule. Perception depends on perspective, but subjectivity is not a measure of reality. Our neural wiring is such that it is virtually impossible for humans to think or even see in absolute terms. Our eyes do not count photons in the way a photographer's light meter does. Rather, we see the world as a pattern of contrasts. The same gray circle may look black to us if presented in a white background, and white if surrounded by black. Our perception depends on context and perspective. We call illusions these cases in which our subjective relativism, oh God, these words, relativism departs dramatically from the objective data, like when we see a gray circle as white, though the photographer's light meter proves it is not. Some of the most dazzling misperceptions rely on the ingenious use of perspective. Kokichi Sugihara, a mathematician from Japan and repeat winner of the Best Illusion of the Year contest, has built cardboard ramps in which wooden balls seem to roll uphill. A different vantage point reveals that the uphill motion is just an illusion, and that the balls are rolling downhill in reality. I did that with at Knott's Berry Farm. They had a thing there that did the exact same thing. Anyway, in our new era of fake news and post-truth gloom, the quest for objective truth and non-alternative facts has become more critical than ever before. Scientists and journalists must join forces in this common endeavor and not hesitate to call out present and future falsehoods, whether due to innocent mistakes or to frank attempts to mislead. Mm-hmm. Whereas post-truth is an illusion with no basis in reality. The actual truth is impervious to our wishes, emotions, or beliefs. The scientific method teaches us that it will only ever attain truth by stubbornly stripping away every piece of misinformation that stands in its way. Investigative reporting and aggressive fact-checking will be crucial to get us there.
Anne, thank you so much. That was wonderful, especially considering our topic today. Much appreciated. Well, I'd like to introduce our speaker, who's one of our own. Doug Matheson is an HGP member who grew up as a missionary kid in India. He attended Seventh-day Adventist schools through college. After college, he worked for the church internationally as a science teacher and also as a public health worker in Rwanda. When he was 37, he quietly left his faith. He continued his career as a science teacher, and when he retired at 62, returned to university to earn a master's degree in social anthropology. Welcome, Doug.
And I want to say welcome to one of my brothers. He's happened up here. He's from Southern California. We're as a family spread all over the place. We have a brother in Spokane, a brother in Tennessee, and he's up here visiting me now from down there. So fiddling in the sense of Caesar in Rome, or being willing to advocate for unpopular positions, a look at a key root of the fact, alternative fact phenomena that we've seen blossom and grow in recent years. I'm taking the risk knowing well that I'm in some senses preaching to the choir on some of the central things I'm saying here, but I take that risk and then okay with it, hoping simply that along the way, I'll offer you some additional tools that you can keep and use in your mental toolkit in interacting with the social, political world in which we all have to interact. So here we go. In February of 2020, I happened to stop by what was called a Smashfest UK Science Expo in London. And I talked with two of the young staffers there. The theme for their expo that year was imagined strategies and techniques to combat a space plague epidemic, those words, which supposedly started right there. After complimenting them for their ingenious way of engaging junior high and high school young people in using science to deal with an imaginary but potentially real problem, I commented to those young staffers that the virus we really need to figure out how to combat is not viruses that attack cells, but the social virus that is trying to manipulate how we think and how we figure things out. The timing of this Science Expo was an interesting pure coincidence because all the planning had gone into it before COVID had hit. And February of 2020, COVID was just hitting. London was not yet shut down. The university was not yet shut down. It was just something that was eerily out there that we were anticipating. My thought then was, yeah, this business of COVID, that's new. But anti-fact, anti-science, anti-expertise, anti-openness to changing our minds, these things were not new and were getting traction and getting worse. How have we gotten to where we are? I'm sharing with you, by the way, and I meant to comment on this right at the get-go, an essay that I e-published. At the end, I'm going to give you the information where you could go there if you're so inclined. We'll have a discussion here, but some of you may have comments to make. You'll be able to put them in writing, and they can be out there with the essay. So, how have we gotten to where we are? Informed and concerned citizens ask this question about our polarized politics, and academics in various disciplines ask this about us in a broad context of civilization as a whole, and us as a species. Fields from paleontology to genetics, from history to psychology, neurophysiology to archaeology, evolutionary biology, all kinds of stuff looks at this. How have we gotten to where we are? In direct ways sometimes and in very indirect ways sometimes. Many today, I suspect it includes all of us here, are justifiably concerned about the direction of civilization. Conversation early on among some of us was on that. I submit that an informed and responsible approach to problem solving and priority setting in terms of where we're going from here really require an accurate knowledge of how we've gotten to where we are. Fairly late in life, with firsthand exposure to horrific and deadly civilizational hiccups in Lebanon and Rwanda, and with up-close exposure to a wide range of religions and a career in science education, I was drawn to anthropology because I saw it as an intersection, a hub, at the center of science being one major spoke, psychology, the study of religion, sociology being another major spoke, and history, political science, economics being another major spoke at that intersection where cross-disciplinary stuff could really help distill and synthesize good, accurate understandings of how have we gotten to where we are, and thus then help us make better informed societal decisions on how to move forward, with the end goal being really giving us our best odds of creating social and physical environments that are quality, that are sustainable for future generations. So I found myself in London, a grad student again in my early mid-60s in a new discipline. I'm going to share with you that I was surprised very early in my studies there, and I was puzzled by this one thing. I had anticipated that social anthropologists would sense that they were standing on the shoulders of giants, building on the foundation laid by physical anthropology, because physical anthropology studies how we got to where we are as a species. And then social anthropology, I think, can build on that. But I was surprised to see that social anthropology very often ignores that and just studies where we are civilizationally, while ignoring that we too have evolutionary roots. We got to where we are as a species before we got to where we are as civilization. And I was puzzled by that. And the context for my thinking was I was a high school biology teacher for a long time. And you help students begin to grasp that, whether it's a redwood tree, an earthworm, a salmon, every living thing has changed over time. They have stories to tell, they have evolutionary roots, and so do we. And I found those roots puzzlingly ignored. This was really acutely ignored if the social anthropology that was going on involved either centrally looking at religion or tangentially looking at religion. That there was no discussion of our evolution. So physical anthropology, I learned quickly, is a newer discipline. Social anthropology had been around for a long time. So social anthropology had built its own academic background before they stopped and realized, you know what, as a species, we developed before society, before civilization developed. And I found this absence to be an absence of simple honesty. I think you have to deal with us as a complete species before you can honestly deal with evolution. I'm going to quickly comment that now, having learned what I learned about social anthropology, having much deeper roots than physical anthropology as an academic discipline, anthropologists out there, if any end up reading this, where it's e-published, or listening to this presentation, they are well aware of, yes, the deeper roots of social anthropology, and the fact that many in social anthropology don't address our evolutionary roots. So I'm not trying to inform them, and I'm not really trying to inform you. The reason I mention it is this. At the heart of what I want to share here is why this lack of honesty and openness about human evolution and about the origins of religion matters. And it matters to civilization in practical ways far beyond the discipline of anthropology. Regular citizens like us, out there in all kinds of settings, we do stop and think things through. This evaluating and responding to ideas is not a new thing. And one of the ideas that I think some of us think about, and I want to encourage us to think about more, is, are there more constructive And are there more destructive ways to live with one central focus, with a central focus on how we live collectively with a particular eye to how large groups can impact the whole of civilization? Drawing from history, psychology, science, the discipline of anthropology, these citizens can thoughtfully participate in evaluating ideas that matter. I'm pointing out that anthropology is well positioned to help broad society better understand how we've gotten to where we are as a species and as civilization, and through that learning, improve our decision-making moving forward. Keeping in mind the adage that just because we can doesn't mean we should, I want to specify here that anthropologists not only can engage in this process, but also should do so with this warning. Doing so will include ways that are uncomfortably honest ones, where people really don't want to hear what you're having to say. And it may need to be said anyway. So allow me to suggest two reasons why this lack of honesty and openness about humanity's deep roots as a species matters. First, despite seeded doubts and drummed up controversy, and there is a clear preponderance of evidence and hard-earned consensus that climate change is real. It's very significantly anthropogenic, and it is becoming increasingly urgent. If you hear Zoom, later people watching, if you're not persuaded by that, a whole separate paper is needed. I'm not going to get into the details here and now. We need not be concerned that life on Earth won't survive. It will. It is the civilizational chaos that rapidly shifting conditions on a densely populated and resource-limited Earth will cause that should concern us. So I'm going to briefly mention that part of what spurs me on is that I was in Rwanda when the genocide hit. I have indelible memories of the sights and sounds and smells of rampant death in that chaos. In the West, we tend only to hear about it being an ethnic thing, the Hutu versus the Tutsi. But it wasn't. What few outsiders understand, because it wasn't often explained, was that Rwanda was the most densely populated country in Africa. In 1940, to give you some context of shift, in 1940, the average family in Rwanda had 12.8 hectares of land to hand cultivate. It was more than they could hand cultivate. 50 years later, 2 generations later, in 1990, when I was there, that was down from 12.8 to 2.7 hectares. When power-mongering politicians broadcast on local radio waves that it was either kill those cockroaches, cockroaches being a term the extremists used on Tutsis, it's either kill those cockroaches now or they will kill you later. That phrase, a generation or two before, I don't think would have been received with believability. It would have been dismissed as nonsense. But in that new context, where families said, oh, we only have this much land, we have this many kids, it was a newly believable thing. The lesson there being that corner human beings into what they perceive as a fight for basic survival resources, and you'll have a cornered, dangerous animal who's not going to act rationally with any broader good in mind. I do want to ultimately focus on solutions, not fears. But for now, permit me to point out that global scale civilizational chaos could create a death spiral, leaving the proportionately few survivors, as some academics predict, living as scattered hunter-gatherers. That's a dark side that I don't think is at all inevitable. It is avoidable. The second specific reason for this mattering is that we live in a time, and this is really the focus of what I'm wanting to share this morning. We live in a time when fact versus alternative fact, evidence-based consensus versus sincerely held belief, the importance of real expertise versus the power of various forms of modern Bible authority, real problem solving versus problem denial or deferral, and open-minded willingness to learn, to update, to change our mind versus the tendency to double down, to stick with our tradition. These things are muddled and confused at best, then ignored or reversed in valuation at worst. Shift lightly with me here for a moment. In a list of my self-evident truths, I included that we owe a decent, stable, and hopefully enjoyable planet to future generations. To be up to this challenge, we've got to be at our best as problem solvers. That requires being honest with evidence and not simply selecting evidence we happen to like, dismissing what we don't like. To cultivate a tendency in that direction, we also need to be honest about things that get in the way of that. We must recognize that it's very human. We can't point fingers at others. This is broadly human to habituate to believing what we want to believe, to expecting that your belief should be respected, which we tend to interpret as going unchallenged. In contrast, we have to learn to question things. We must then ask, where in human experience do we get the most practice, the most reinforcement, the most refinement of habituation to believing what we want to believe and expecting that to be respected, to go unchallenged? So that's a question I want you to pause and think about it for a second. Where do we get the most practice at that being perfectly fine? I've now spent more than 2 decades searching and a recent year studying anthropology to find the best answer I can to this question. And I have yet to find a better supported answer than this. A typical training within a community of those with sincerely held religious beliefs. From childhood, and I speak from a life experience many of you can evaluate from a life experience. From childhood, we learn that we don't directly and openly challenge others' beliefs, even if we do try to share our better beliefs. And within our own communities, we might call their stuff nutty or even dangerous, but we still don't challenge it openly. We don't engage with it in exchange for the trust that they won't openly challenge our stuff. So we have a quid pro quo that we grow up with and learn to live with. It's a very short step then in our brains to expecting non-religious beliefs to also be respected, to go unchallenged. Interestingly, this seems to be increasing in recent years. Flat earthers now hold conventions. Some of you may have looked up and read stuff like that. But they still don't like a real challenge. They just like the freedom to do their thing. There are people out there who deny plate tectonics. Some of the same people insist that Earth is very young, and they don't like being challenged on the details of the science. Racists have re-emerged much more openly. And while they seem very willing to engage in a physical fight, they don't like a deep and evidence-based, or we feel like I'm starting to echo worse there. They don't like a serious evidence-based intellectual challenge. Some say vaccines are dangerous conspiracies. and feel attacked if they are challenged. And I think, elephant in the room here, many dismiss climate change and don't want a discussion of serious physics or broad evidence, and won't read deep and detailed reports and analyses if they can superficially tell that that doesn't happen to agree with their preformed opinion. And they feel that their opinion is of equal weight to the evidence, the reasons, and concerns explained by the experts. Habituation does, habits do matter. So I realize some readers might be already balking at the idea that strong religious communities contribute to believers expecting that whatever our beliefs are should not be challenged. So brace yourself, I'm taking this a step further. Members of many varied religious communities scattered around our globe have often never even heard an evidence-based explanation of religion's origins, the history there. And I want to pause and thank Gordon about 2 months ago. Gordon, if you're there on Zoom, thank you, my man. You shared a wonderful, rich, long thing on the origins of religion. I'm going to be sharing briefly here a summary, because I think summaries are needed, and not everyone who may read or hear this heard Gordon's extended thing. Among 3 books I mentioned here, I'm going to only mention one out loud. Pascal Boyer published a book called Religion Explained. And it is deeply academic, but it's also very readable, and it's incredibly thorough. If you happen to go to the medium.com website, I'll give you later, you'll find a few more books mentioned there. As noted, we've figured out the story of our roots through closely related fields, the shoulders we build on now. Physical anthropology has helped us understand our arrival as a species. And archaeology is a major tool used in that. And we now add very specific disciplines like cognitive psychology that is enriching our understanding of how we think and how we've gotten to where we are as a thinking species. The details they've painstakingly worked out tell the story, supported further back by basic paleontology, of human evolution. We can see the earlier brain case volume increase. And then between 100,000 years ago and 50,000 years ago, we see a relatively sudden change in several things. One, our tool use, fairly rapid diversification. Second one, symbol use in artistic stuff, a rapid diversification. And ceremonial burial. Even more so than our stepped-up variation of tools, our increasingly complex use of symbols is a strong indicator of growth in breadth and depth of our very mental capacities. Among them, agency detection, okay, real and imagined. A deepening self-awareness, something we call theory of mind. Some of you know, some of you, I'll explain it briefly. It's the tendency to think or imagine about what somebody else, some other being, is thinking. Okay, thinking about their thinking. And increasingly complex social interaction and everything that goes with increased intelligence and communication ability, including simply pondering things. Picture all the unexplainables that cavemen had. Note that I used the word our mental capacities, not capacity, singular. The interplay between different inference systems in our brains is a vital thing to understand in terms of our development. Our early ancestors developed agency detection, for example, because it was selected for better, a false positive that the rustling in the grass was a predator that wasn't there, then a false negative that it was nothing when it was something. So agency detection grew, piggybacked on simple agency detection. One of the things Gordon mentioned was intentionality, the thought idea in our heads that some cause was not just a random cause, it was a thoughtfully deliberate, intentional thing. Somebody else had intentions. They also had a seemingly endless set of puzzlers about everything in their life circumstances. Why did the river rise when it hadn't rained in months on their horizon? Okay. I share a long list of examples here, and I'm going to get to the last one. They puzzled, no doubt, about, man, what are these things I see in my eyes sometimes when I sleep? And what do they mean? So cavemen had a lot to puzzle about. By far the most likely agency, which people in those primitive circumstances could and probably did come up with, were spirit world explanations, which of course soon they ascribed names to and general intentions to them. Naturally, these would have been passed down in stories, becoming oral histories in their clan, and their particular collection of spirits became part of their clan's identity, probably contributing a unifying and sense of belonging, creating adaptive feature with no obvious maladaptive costs in that context. In addition to this mental capacity for detecting real agency and imagine others, when we include Tom, theory of mind, and thinking about what other agents, including spirit worlds, might be intending, picture this little sequence. A caveman out on a hunt. His brother got gored, and he sees his brother's eyes fade to the blank stare of death. He saw the same thing in his toddling daughter's eyes from 2 days of simply watery crapping. He probably came to wonder and possibly fear death, in a sense beyond an animal's struggle to not drown or not be eaten. But he and his clan would likely have created stories about what might be possible, what might happen after death. And these stories could help reduce fear and add hope, thus being a possible helpful and adaptive mechanism for dealing with their very hazard-filled life. It's no surprise that as hunter-gathering ways gave way then to the Green Revolution and to living in communities, that as labor specialized and society stratified, these spirit world intentional agents and realms solidified into increasingly formalized religions. Complex sets of symbols and rituals, varied means of appealing for the intervention of certain prime spirits. These developed into religions, as did a priest class to rule that domain. Through this came the great variety of gods, faiths, texts, varying with location and time. I mentioned that risk that religion is accompanied by habituation to expecting one's beliefs to be respected, to go unchallenged, and that of away from religion to real concrete earthly things like climate change. We become rendered immune to evidence and to facts that we don't happen to like. Some members of the broader public may not yet or ever see these suggested explanations of religion as plausible, but I would counter that we still need introductions to and then reminders that what makes ideas more or less well connected to realities is the verifiable evidence, not the intensity of conviction. We need reminders that in democracies where voters hire the crews that run the ships of state, citizens having mindsets that are not set on preformed claims-based beliefs and are rather open to change, to verifiable evidence. This honesty about the need to overcome our tendencies to believe what we happen to like and dismiss the rest This is vital. A couple of clarifications. This is not a call for a litmus test among anthropologists or among citizens. We don't have to all be atheists. I hope we can honestly recognize and face psychological factors that get in the way of us realistically addressing urgent issues like climate change, not only climate change. These psychological factors which can contribute to confusion when considering the profound difference between consensus on the most plausible explanation of evidence as compared to collections of alternative facts, recent conspiracy theories, and sincerely held beliefs. I'm going to go ahead and mention out loud one anthropologist, Charles Lindholm. 25 years ago, he wrote a lengthy essay. It's pretty deep, but a practical thing he tries to synthesize there that's very understandable is he warned of the fact that we're getting to where fact and fantasy are mingled and confused. And to me, that was profoundly insightful and vitally important. And I only see it as getting more important in the 25 years since he wrote it. If you are persuaded that social and civilizational risks and challenges associated with climate change and more are great and are urgent, and if you are persuaded that in order to collectively be good problem solvers on a global scale, we need to reduce the level of habituation to believing what we want and expecting that to go unchallenged, thereby remaining of unchanged mind on multiple issues, then I hope you will also find yourself persuaded that we as individual concerned citizens must engage in open discussion with our fellow citizens of the avoidable but serious risks that have tended to go with strong faith. We are often enough reminded of the difficulties of speaking truth to power. I submit that we need to give more thought to the challenges of speaking truth to the masses. I'm not speaking here of those hanging on by their economic fingernails. They can be forgiven for their necessary preoccupation with survival and helped toward less precarity. I'm speaking of the many who are concerned, but too often confused, who work at being informed, but are slowed and distracted by not having a fairly reliable way to evaluate information for accuracy, who intend to vote and often do, who sometimes do question things, who participate in types of public dialogue, whether simply with family or coworkers, reading or writing op-eds or blogs, and who participate in other social media where ideas, for better or for worse, can do their viral thing, take off and go. In would-be democracies, this matters. I hope most reading or hearing this might find yourselves persuaded to openly and unapologetically advocate for our best tool for finding relative and probable truth, this science-like approach, and persuaded that a more honest and frequent, even if sometimes unwelcome, reminding of the human story, including at least a basic explanation of religion, is needed and could be constructive.
Doug, thank you. That was hard because what you are speaking on is what we all of us are struggling with right now. As a country, as a society, as a world, your whole idea that life is going to do just fine if we don't do something with climate change, but human beings will not. Our society will, the planet's going to do just fine. We are now open for questions.
Yes, sir.
We have a 50% chance that Trump's going to become president and that he's going to be a horrible accident. I don't think I can convince anybody between now and then to vote different. I mean, my dad loved science. I loved science, but I also believe only what feels right. And it took me a whole lifetime to realize there's a difference between belief and truth. And I've never been able to convince anybody else of that.
So
I guess my
you're
question.
right to point out that there are plenty of cases where our chances of changing a mind are essentially zero. Okay, and I sometimes quit beating my head against certain walls. Okay, you have to figure out which walls are doors worth knocking on, and save yourself some of the headache without completely disengaging. Because I don't think, our politics, it's like a marketplace of ideas. And some people think you should just keep it all to yourself and be respectful of everybody else. And I'm going, wait a minute, that's not responsible toward the future. And so I continue to knock on doors, so to speak, and engage. And I know that over time, plenty of times I experience some success. Plenty of times I don't. So I can't take the times I don't experience some success, and I know that person is entrenched as ever before, and make me give up on it all, or we'd all just give up. I mean, in this room, we have a lot of decades of life experience, and it becomes trite to say this election is the most important of our lifetimes, because how many times have we heard that? I mean, we have to engage, we have to help. And many times in modern culture, people don't read books and essays as much as they used to, and so they're going to a 2-minute YouTube haranguing. But we can't give up. We cannot give up. I hope you're with me in that.
Let's see. Hank, Rob, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
I do have a question.
Very good.
My question is this. It seems to me that religions are all about a relationship to the supernatural. But I don't hear the notion that supernaturalism itself as an idea, never mind religion, supernaturalism itself is not working and ought to be abandoned, and that we would advocate in every corner the abandonment of supernaturalism. Now, you said, I don't want to advocate atheism, but that's just one area of supernaturalism. There are plenty of people who are looking at crystals for one thing or another. They have no religion at all. They're not talking about God. They're talking about some other supernatural idea. So what I want to understand is, why are you not an advocate for supernaturalism has proven itself not to work when it comes to dealing with human issues?
Okay, fair question. I advocate for science broadly, and the notion that you have to be willing to change your mind to recognize when you had something that has turned out to be wrong. I'm going to say maybe 15 years ago, I was harder nosed about saying directly and overtly that non-science is nonsense. But I found that when people want desperately to hang on to their faith of whatever brand, that you're not going to succeed with that message. And so I've modified my message to saying, okay, if you want to hang on to Islam, or if you want to hang on to Judaism, if you want to hang on to Seventh-day Adventism that I grew up in, you wanted to hang on to Catholicism, be my guest, hang on to it if it adds something to your life. Will you please, though, self-monitor against jumping on the bandwagon of war in the name of God, in the name of your God, of presuming that everything's in God's hands and you're too small to make a difference, of letting it infect your thinking broadly to where you say, well, I get to believe what I want and that should be respected, and therefore that applies to all my other stuff. When no, we get to challenge. We get to challenge. And the last one I don't very often mention, and that is that poor marginalized people get persuaded to continue to bring their tithe into the storehouse. And meanwhile, they're patient infinitely with an abysmal life. And I don't think that impacts the whole of civilization the way the other three do, but I still think it's pathetic that we can know of that and let it go on. So that again, I granted that has more to do with religion per se, not so much supernaturalism. And thank you for the thought. I'll see if maybe I need to include that some more when I do get opportunities to share.
Thank you, Doug. Our next question, Al Christians.
Yes, Hank brought this up, that quack science is in many ways like religion, and all 50 states, as far as I guess, have dealt with the problem of quack science, medical sciences, or related to quack healing sciences. And almost all of them have decided that if these things are licensed and regulated, they're better off than if they're carried on sub rosa in the underground economy. And thus they're legal, licensed, regulated, and even covered by insurance in a lot of states. Can we do that for religion?
That would be a real good one, to get the state into licensing or not licensing religions. Yeah, I don't think any of us really want to go there.
But Doug, I think Elle's question does bring up, how do you deal with, and I, as a medical professional myself, how do you deal with the fact that some medical things that are going on in this world right now are licensed and accredited by the state, whether scientifically it has any proof of making a difference?
I agree. There's a problem there to do with consumer protection laws, et cetera. I tend not to see, and that's a problem, but I tend not to see it on the scale of the problem of people habituating to believing what they want to believe and thinking that they really have a right to that, and that you're being crassly disrespectful when you want to challenge that,
Right.
because that then they don't want to engage with you on a political discussion, or you're being disrespectful to their claims, or you know, that's core to the survival of civilization or not, in my opinion.
I'm a member of a group called Building Trust here at the HGP, and it's been going on for a couple of years. And we struggled, and we still are struggling, because it's bringing people of different political viewpoints, be it labeled liberal, labeled conservative, trying to bring them together. And it's really hard. It's very easy when we're just together having a cookie and sharing thoughts that are more superficial or more human, more emotional. But as soon as we get talking about the political things, it gets tough. And I just want to sometimes scream, are you crazy? That's, and then when people do bring in the facts, like people get angry, like, why are you doubting me? I brought my facts, and now you're countering with your facts, and you're disrespectful of my facts. And but what I've noticed, and is over this last year when we've been meeting monthly, and have formed some relationships. People have gotten sick or fallen, things have changed in their lives. And so that I personally can't be as negative about them as people, those others, as I used to be, because I'm beginning to care about them as human beings. But it's taken, really care about them, just they're my friends now. And it takes time to build relationships so that people are willing to listen to you. It takes, I think, years of listening and relationships. So how do you counter your belief of science fact against the time it takes to build relationship so that they'll listen to you?
Yeah, boy, I don't have an easy or formulaic answer to that. And by the way, I learned of your group a couple of weeks ago at the men's luncheon from Dave, and I shook my head and I said, man, I respect the heck out of what you guys are trying to do there. I would find inevitably that there are times there that you want to just go, ah.
And I'm sure it's in both directions.
Yeah, right.
I'm positive of that.
And I don't know. I have an old friend who's honest, in all honesty, hardly a friend anymore at all, who thinks I'm too honest. And I put stuff out there. I'm willing to offend. I don't seek to offend, but I'm willing to offend. And he thinks that behind the willing to offend, he thinks I actually seek to offend. And I'm going, no, I don't. I really, really, really don't. But I guess it comes down to how urgent do we think things are getting?
Yeah. How urgent do we think things are getting?
If this business of fact versus alternative fact, sincerely held personal belief, does that equal fact? How do we deal with all of that? And I am increasingly concerned that where that friend wants to say to me, just love everybody. And I'm going, just loving everybody and ignoring, it's like, I use the illustration being on something like the Titanic. And if somehow some of us passengers, we're all passengers, we get to hire the crew. If we become very aware of the iceberg ahead, and some people are busy sipping tea and listening to the string quartet. At what point do we interrupt the sipping of tea and the string quartet to say, hey, yo, can I share,
there's an iceberg.
There is the problem of when do I be willing to say, whoa, time freaking out. This is getting urgent. Facts matter more than alternative facts. Opinions are not all equal. Opinions that are well connected to checkable realities matter more than opinions that are just plucked off the top of your head. That's just life. It's not a welcome observation, but it's still factual. So I appreciate and I respect what you guys are doing, and I hope you can do the heck out of it. Sometimes I confess I'm glad I'm not there.
Yeah. Oh, I'm the leader, and there's sometimes I wish I wasn't. Okay, Todd has a question.
I really enjoyed your presentation today. This relates to Hank's question, but I think you might have a little bit more to say about this. Have you noticed in your work or talking to people or through your own experience that when people experience a tragedy that contradicts their faith and it goes against religion, that they're more open to changing or questioning their faith and more open to facts and evidence?
Short answer is sometimes yes. Now, I wish I could psychoanalyze, when jewelers cleave diamonds, where exactly is it going to break? If you could get down there at the atomic level. these traumatic experiences, some people, they become all the more fervent in their old beliefs. It becomes essential to their mental health, if I can call it that. And other people, it is the break point. A colleague of mine in Southern California from the early 80s, I got together with her 2 years ago, and she taught at the same church school I taught at, later became the principal and was principal of that church school for like 20 years, and is now out of faith entirely, not only out of the Adventist faith, but out of faith. And for her, the straw that broke the camel's back was a health crisis that completely debilitated her husband, but didn't kill him. And she has been saddled with 20 years of care providing somebody who's hardly there. And in her case, that was like, God, ain't no way. Some people break one way, some people break the other way. And I am not a good predictor of which way somebody's going to break.
Hank, Rob, can you come in? He's got a comment here. Once again, object to the notion that the only kind of faith is faith in the supernatural.
Yes, I'm sorry for my mistyping.
No, go ahead. Just give a little bit more explanation. We've got time.
This notion that the word faith is only relevant to faith in the supernatural rather than faith in other things. As I like to point out, if faith, as I understand it, is belief in things unseen. Anyone who has a child and starts a college fund has committed an act of faith. There's no certainty that that kid's going to college or that kid will even be alive. So this notion of giving over to the supernaturalists, that we, the non-supernaturalists, are somehow unfaithful, is to me a serious mistake.
Oh, so I'm not sure what you're looking for there. I will simply say I agree that faith is a broader word. One of the criticisms that some people make of science is that when it comes to the universe's origin, or the first living cells, those are two key points that, you know, we can't point to a perfect explanation of things. And they say, well, you have faith. And I simply say, well, when I look at the last 500 years of human history, I have a lot of confidence that our best tool for figuring things out is a science-like process where we get to question everything, we get to propose ideas, we get to gather objective evidence, and we get to adjust our conclusions to best fit the evidence that we do have. I have great confidence in that process. And you can call it faith and you can criticize it if you want, but I would say we don't have a better tool. It has earned my confidence, and earned confidence is something different than blind faith. So that's one of the fine points I try to make, that earned confidence is not blind faith. But still, you know, when you drive at night at normal speeds with your high beams down on low beams out of courtesy to everything around you, there could be a giant hole in the pavement up ahead that you wouldn't see in time to avoid. You'd just go into the giant hole. Well, you have faith that there's not a giant hole in the pavement and that there's, you know, not something weird out to get you, because most of our life works.
The comment on Zoom was that might vary state by state. Okay, I think this will be our final question. Al, go ahead.
Okay, you say science is our best tool. The question is, what's inside science and what is it? Now, for example, I have a Bachelor of Science in Economics, which nobody's laughing about that. And how do you decide what's in and what's out. If you look at what physics is a science of what our instruments do when they're confronted with reality. Doesn't really tell you what reality does. How do you decide who's in and who's out?
Well, I hope you wouldn't set out to just intentionally muddy the water. Because I think that science is not some outside reality, some set of facts on a shelf. Science is a human process whereby we try to explore things and come to better understand, in the case of hard science, the physical realities of the universe. You know, I'm quite confident that we understand what's going on inside our sun and how stars form and how planets form. You know, there's a lot of things I'm quite confident of, even if I'm not a world-class expert in those fields. But science does branch out beyond the hard sciences, beyond the physics, beyond the astrophysics. And we have the social sciences where the hardness of it diminishes towards softness. And one of the central points that Charles Lindholm, the anthropologist, was mentioning there about the mingling of fact and fantasy is that in the case of anthropology as a social science, if I can get at your question this way, back in the 1970s, anthropology went through a phase where it asserted a lot of hard claims. And they began to realize that, you know, we've overstated things, we've oversimplified, we tried to make it too factual. And so they tried to correct that swing of the pendulum back towards softening their position. But in my opinion, the pendulum swung too far that way, which is what Charles Lindholm was addressing, is when you get to saying of religion, for example, where anthropologists back in the 70s were willing to say what religion's origins were. By the 1990s into the 2000s, some anthropologists were saying, no, we can't say anything about religion's origins. We just need to be respectful of religion. Okay? And I'm going, with Charles Lindholm, I'm going, wait a minute. If we want to mingle fact and fantasy, we're headed that way. With that swing of the pendulum, we're headed that way. And that's not going to help us solve the challenges of a resource-limited planet with 8 billion plus people, where we have to make hard choices. And evidence matters. Diversity of opinions is great. We all are indeed entitled to our opinions, but to then conclude that all opinions are of equal weight and all opinions are equally valid is just nonsense.
Right.
And so even in the soft sciences, there are realities, and the better we can explore those and test them, the better. It's not easy.
No,
and I don't
no.
need to tell you that.
No.
I appreciate your question. Hopefully my circuitous answer added something.
Doug, I want to thank you so much for this really thoughtful presentation. Well done.